The Stranger in the Library. It started with a flyer. Community library, night shift caretaker needed. Jake saw it taped to a lamppost while walking home. He needed a job and the pay was decent. The library was small, tucked away on a quiet street. It seemed easy enough. The librarian, Mrs. Grayson, was kind but strict. Lock up by midnight. Don't go into the archives. It's off limits, she said. Jake nodded. He didn't care about archives. He just needed to pay rent. For the first few nights, nothing happened. Jake read books, cleaned shelves, and sipped coffee from a thermos. At 11:50 p.m., he'd lock up and leave. Then one night, something changed. It was a quiet Thursday. The rain outside drummed softly against the windows. Jake was sorting books when he heard it. A faint shuffle. He looked up. "Hello?" His voice echoed. No response. It wasn't unusual. The old building creaked sometimes, but then he heard it again. The sound came from the archives. Jake hesitated. He remembered Mrs. Grayson's warning, but curiosity got the better of him. He walked to the heavy wooden door. The lock was broken. Maybe it's just an animal, he whispered to himself. He pushed the door open. Inside, the air was cold. Shelves stretched endlessly, stacked with old books, covered in dust. A faint light flickered at the far end. Jake frowned. "Is someone there?" he called. A voice replied. Yes. It wasn't loud, just one word spoken softly. Jake froze. "Who are you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. No answer. He stepped deeper into the room. Light came from a small desk lamp. A man sat there reading a book. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, like something out of the 1950s. His hair was neat and his hands rested lightly on the book's cover. "Sorry, the library's closed," Jake said. The man looked up. His face was pale, almost too smooth. He smiled. "I know." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "How did you get in here?" "I never left." Jake frowned. "What does that mean?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he slid the book toward Jake. The title read, "What is this?" Jake asked. "It's your story," the man said simply. Jake laughed nervously. "Very funny. Look, you need to leave. I'm locking up." The man leaned forward. His eyes were dark. Too dark. "Read it," he said. Something about his tone made Jake pick up the book. He flipped through the pages. His breath caught. The book described everything. The flyer, Mrs. Grayson, the broken lock, even this moment, standing in the archives. "This is some kind of joke," Jake said, but his voice wavered. "It's not a joke," the man said. "It's a warning." Jake slammed the book shut. "I don't know who you are, but you need to leave." The man stood. His movements were stiff, unnatural. He leaned close to Jake. "The story ends at midnight," he whispered. The clock struck 11:59 p.m. Jake's heart pounded. He turned and ran. The door slammed shut behind him. He locked it, breathing heavily. The rain had stopped. The street was eerily quiet. Jake didn't look back. The next morning, he quit. A week later, he saw a new flyer. "Community library, night shift caretaker needed." He ripped it down.